The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.
Welcome. I hope you're ready to relax and enjoy yourself because we're taking you to Tamarac today, just northeast of Detroit Lakes. The refuge began in 1938. Tom Hunt grew up here in the 50s. The third manager out here was Robley Hunt, and I'm here with his son Tom, who grew up on the Wildlife Refuge. Many of you remember Tom as the sheriff of Becker County, but what was it like growing up here, Tom?
Probably in one word, it was fun.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, it was a challenge. Didn't have many friends my age around. I worked with a lot of people that were local in the area, but no, it was a good time.
Yeah.
Good time.
You told me that you got on the school bus. How early?
It was about 10 minutes to 7 in the morning, year-round. Well, not year-round, but
Yeah,
in the
9
winter
months.
it was dark, and I'd get home at about 5:30 and it was dark, so I knew this place pretty well in the dark.
And you knew the sounds. We're sitting in front of the wolf display on purpose because you could hear the wolves out here.
Yes, it could. Not very often, but every once in a while on a nice quiet night, you'd hear them howling or evidently chasing some sort of a wildlife or whatever. I don't know, deer, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was,
What kind of
here.
activities did you get involved in? Did you help your dad as the manager?
well, yes, I did. At least I think I did. We used to go out in all the lakes around here with a canoe and a paddle and binoculars and skirt around the lakes and take brood counts, count all the ducklings in the spring of the year so they get an idea of what was growing here or what was being produced here. And that was a lot of fun, a lot of work. I probably complained a lot at the time, but the more I think about it, boy, I was fortunate. It was
Yeah,
fun.
isn't it funny how when time passes, then it seems like it was fun?
It does. And one time, when we were out on Pine Lake, canoeing, we were back in one of the bays, and you could see the water, the grass and everything down below, and we were just kind of cruising along, and all of a sudden, boom, the canoe tips like that, and like, what the heck? And I looked down, and here's a big old snapping turtle, and to me, it looked that big. And he had just bumped the bottom of the canoe. My dad sat back there and laughed, and I was probably panic-stricken for a while, but I'll tell you, that woke me up in a hurry.
Did you tip over?
No,
Oh.
no, we didn't. Thank
Okay.
goodness. Oh, I'd have walked on water to get out of there.
Yeah, they've got some teeth. What about, you told me about ricing. There's a ricing display here too. You witnessed that and you even got to do some ricing.
I did some ricing down in the south end of the refuge. The reservation had majority of the refuge that they riced on, but we were able to do it down there, and I had a partner that was from White Earth and was finishing rice, so he and I'd go buy some rice, green rice, take it up, and we'd dry it, get rid of all the bugs and everything out of it, and run it through the mill and through the roasters and get a finished product, and we'd pass it on to people that for Christmas presents for one
Yeah.
thing. They loved it.
And you appreciate it more then.
Oh, much so. Yeah, very much so. We eat rice to this day. Had some last Sunday, and we'll have some probably next week again.
Yeah, and you think of all the work that went into it, and then also the nostalgia that you remember that.
I can remember watching some of the ladies sitting in the front of the canoe, and her husband had the long pole and was pulling along, and they would sit there and beat the rice off, and they'd come back in with just a canoe full of rice, and I tell you, they knew how to do it. It was really
pros.
fun to watch.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. And then you mentioned some of the men that you got to know that you'd swap stories around the campfire after work.
Well, pretty much so. Tom Jones and Charlie Stone from Ponsford, good friends of mine, or got to be good friends. I helped them, and they were the general maintenance men here on the refuge. And we'd pick rock or fix fences or do whatever, and I got to know them pretty well. And then in the wintertime, when some of the people from Ponsford area would come over and they were doing some timber work, they'd always break at lunchtime and build a big fire or whatever. And I can remember one of the times porcupine was over there, somebody had shot it, And they were roasting it on the fire, and I'm going, really? Yeah, do you want to try sometime? You should have some. No, that's okay. And they laughed and laughed. It was a big joke, but it was fun. They were great guys.
Yeah. Well, you must have gotten a totally different snapshot of history. You were living history out here.
I guess, yes, that's true.
Compared to the rest of us, we're reading about it in books.
Well, I got to see it firsthand.
Yeah.
No, it was nice.
Yeah. And then as far as recreation, what were some of the activities that you did?
A friend of mine had an old beat-up car. It rode. Had a big old toboggan we'd pull behind the car and doing some of the refuge roads or whatever in the wintertime. It was a great fun. And the girls liked it too.
But now if you were sheriff, you would have probably stopped young people doing something like that.
We were on the back roads where the sheriff did not patrol.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at that time, yeah. No,
But you were horsing around.
that's true.
Okay. And you told me you played basketball in some of the old buildings here?
We had a building over here. It was one of the maintenance buildings. My dad set up a basketball hoop, so I'd sit there in the wintertime and shoot baskets and pretend all kinds of wild games are going on or whatever. But
And I found out where those Canadian geese came from that I get so upset about that are out on my front yard. You were somewhat responsible for them.
I hope so. I love geese. I love the sounds of them, but I every time I go outside and I hear them flying overhead, it's just like, oh, this is it. But we raised geese here on the refuge. They'd bring some geese in that were captured down in Missouri, one of the places, and cut their wings, and they would lay eggs, and they couldn't fly away, so they'd stay here, and they'd raise their young, and the next year and the year after, or years after, the young would come back to where they were born and raise their young ones around here. One of the things we did, or one of the things I was involved in, during the rainy season in the spring when the geese were laying their eggs, we had little platforms out in the middle of little potholes. You had wire fences around them, try to keep the critters away. And it got to the point where the water was rising and rising, getting up awful close to the platform. And the eggs, of course, were in danger of being spoiled. So we ran water pumps just about 24 hours a day. And it was raining constantly, and so I had the midnight shift, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever. But we made it, and we didn't lose any. So that was fun.
But before that, there were very few Canadian geese.
They weren't here, no. And that was probably the start of them. They started some up in Agassiz Refuge even before that, and they just slowly started to accumulate. And then Fergus Falls is the first ones we heard about were complaining because they are there in the wintertime in the open water.
Yeah.
People didn't like that.
Yeah. Well, I'll complain to you when the camera's off.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your memories of Tamarac. We'll visit with Lowell Deedy next. Lowell Deedy was here for 29 years as a wildlife biologist. We're sitting in front of one of his favorite animals, or not favorite animal, the beaver. Lowell, what did you do to these guys?
Well, from time to time, we had to blow their beaver dams. And the reason for that is to lower the water levels so the wild rice that was growing upstream from where the dam site was wouldn't get flooded out. Wild rice is a tremendous plant food crop for wildlife, and it's also important for the Native Americans. Oh, for humans too. Including the tribal members.
Yeah, you have a lot of pride in the eagle that is around. It's common now. I mean, I have them in my front yard, but when you started, it was...
There weren't very many nesting pairs here. When I came in 1985, there were 8 pairs of nesting eagles on the refuge. And we thought that, gosh, that's a pretty high density. And then it went to 12 and then to 16, and oh, they're saturated. Well, then it ballooned to 20, and I'm not even sure how many eagles are nesting here now. But their population has increased, and they've spread out from the refuge here from Tamarac. That's been a pretty neat success story.
Yeah, and I remember the day the trumpeter swan was brought to Tamarac. I was still at Channel 4 KXJB in Fargo, and Julie Holgate came out here and did a story. That was a big, big deal, and very successful story.
One of the trumpeters latched on to Carol Henderson's nose, and there's a photo of it in the newspaper, and it wouldn't let go for quite a while.
Yeah.
Anyway, the trumpeters were brought here in 1987, and they came up from they were being raised by the DNR in the Twin Cities, and Carol was instrumental in that. And they flew to Fargo on I think it was a C-130, big cargo plane, and I had driven the stake bed truck over there, and they were loaded onto the truck, and then I brought them back here for the distribution to go into a number of different lakes throughout the area.
And now, I don't want to say they're common, but I see them quite a bit.
Yeah, they have done extremely well. One of the situations that Minnesota DNR was thinking is that they would, being that we're on the edge of the prairie, the woods mostly to the east, they would dominate and go to the prairie lakes and marshes. Well, that has happened, but there are a lot of trumpeters in the wooded area, in the wooded lakes, and so
and they're beautiful. People
they
just
are.
love them.
Yeah.
What other accomplishments really stand out in your mind?
Well, one of the things too is that the timber wolf, the gray wolf, was not very common when I first started here, and it would be interesting to hear a report of, oh, there's a wolf track. Well, now the wolves have been associated with Tamarac, and there's at least one pack, possibly two, that are, I think, still in the Tamarac area. And so they were not reintroduced. They came in on their own, and we've got the habitat for them and the security of cover and the food, so good place for them to call home.
Beautiful refuge.
Yeah, definitely is.
Large and beautiful, many, many lakes. We're going to learn more about the present day activities here at Tamarac, as well as future plans with Kelly Blackledge next week. Hope to see you then.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Museum Roadshow, brought to you by 125 Apparel.